joining us today. It's a pleasure to convene this meeting of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights as we resume our study on human trafficking. As my colleague Rob Nicholson mentioned, we just got back from a cross-Canada tour where we hit Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, Edmonton, and Vancouver, and we got a chance to hear firsthand from literally hundreds of Canadians who are involved in this issue. And we very much appreciate you coming before us and adding to our understanding. I'd like to introduce the witnesses today. From Victoria, British Columbia, we have Dr. Cecilia Benoit, who is professor and scientist at UVic. Dr. Benoit, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you pronounce it Benoit or Benoit?
Benoit.
Benoit, okay. Excellent. Then we have Ms. Tara Leach, who is a primary care nurse practitioner. Welcome, Ms. Leach. Thank you for coming. And from the Ottawa Coalition to End Human Trafficking, we have Ms. Sherry Lacey, who is the head of the Youth Committee, Social Work, Youth and Family Therapy. Welcome. And Ms. Jody Mosley, who is the head Community Presentation Committee. Welcome. And from the Ottawa Police Service, c'est un grand plaisir d'accueillir Monsieur Damien.
It's a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Damien Laflamme, Sergeant from the Human Trafficking Unit, and Karine Casagrande, Crime Analyst, Human Trafficking Unit. Thank you so much for being here. So this is how we'll proceed. We will follow the order.
Means that we're going to start with Dr. Benoit. You have 8 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I don't miss any points, I'm actually going to read my presentation. So I gather your study aims to shed light on human trafficking in Canada. Understandably, we are all interested in making sure that vulnerable people are not exploited or taken advantage of. Such criminal behavior needs to be prevented, detected, and prosecuted. Despite sensational claims, the good news is that human trafficking is not widespread in adult prostitution in Canada. In fact, it appears that most people, adults who sell sexual services in our country, have freedom of movement to work and are not coerced or exploited by others. I draw this conclusion from the accounts of over 1,200 people who my colleagues and I have interviewed in different studies in the last 2 decades. As there is no random examples to select from, we use a variety of strategies, including internet sites, community contacts, and participants' own networks to capture the experience of a wide group of people. We found that many of our participants belong to informal groups where they have friendships with other workers, share safety strategies, develop regular clientele, and create connections with those operating escort agencies and massage parlors. We have found overall that these networks increase the health, safety, and well-being of individuals engaged in adult prostitution. Further, these networks mean that when human trafficking is happening on the ground, our participants are likely to hear about it. Even though their past negative experience with the police and in the justice system are major barriers to reporting activities, which I'll note below, our participants were very frank in their interviews with us. So today, I want to touch on a few of our research findings. More results are available in our peer review articles. But first, a short summary of our participants from a recent Canadian study. In 2012-2013, we interviewed 218 individuals from 6 Canadian cities. To take part, participants had to be 19 years of age or older, legally able to work in Canada, and have exchanged 15 or more sexual services in the last 12 months. Participants ranged in age from 19 to 61, and most were in their 30s. Their median annual income was just under $40,000. 3/4 identified as women and 20% identified as Indigenous. The average age at which they sold a sexual service was 24 years. 18% said they had done so before age 18. Over half worked independently off-street, 20% worked independently on-street, and 25% said they worked mainly in a managed setting, such as a massage parlor or an escort agency. Pertinent to this study, 6% were forced or exploited to sell sexual services at any point in their lifetime, but none said they were currently being controlled by what is commonly called a pimp. The vast majority said the main reason they got involved was the need or desire for money, which is a similar reason most Canadians working occupations. And also 35% were involved in other kinds of work as well as prostitution, and 20% were enrolled in an educational program. So as I mentioned above, we wanted to know more about their views on the justice system, and here's what they told us. 2/3 said they had little or no confidence in the police, which is 4 times higher than other Canadians. They had 3 main reasons why they felt this way. Their first concern was discrimination. Half of them had experienced judgmental treatment in the justice system caused by stigma towards and about them. One participant said, "They're disrespectful. Police say if you're going to get paid for sex, then you can't be raped." Another participant said, "I had one cop tell me I'm just a native whore." Their second concern was fear of being arrested. One participant stated, "I've known sex workers who reported the crime that they were a victim of, but when the police found out they were in street sex work, they ended up getting arrested instead of the person who had committed violence against them." And their third concern was targeting of their workplaces. Participants said that the police made their work, quote unquote, harder and less safe by targeting escort agencies and other safe workplaces when they should be going after traffickers. One participant put it this way: "You know sexual slavery is going on, yet the police don't do anything but waste your time going after small agencies that run well." These actions undermined our participants' trust in the police, increased their suspicion of law enforcement, and discouraged reaching out when someone or themselves were in danger. In contrast, some participants countered with positive accounts of police officers who were respectful and who did use discretion in law enforcement. Also noteworthy was the variation between the cities that we studied in police confidence. So in closing, I would like to leave you with these takeaway messages. First, adult consensual sex for money is not human trafficking. It is vitally important not to conflate the two so that we are better able to address actual cases of human trafficking. Second, adults who sell sexual services are more diverse than they are usually portrayed, and their access to health and safety services should be non-conditional and non-discriminatory. Third, coercion and exploitation in adult prostitution are much less common than is claimed. Fourth, police need to improve their relationships with people who sell sexual services so that they feel confident in reporting crimes without fear of being prosecuted or put under surveillance. And finally, targeting commercial sex locations forces workers to find clients in other ways, which may make them more vulnerable. It also wastes police time and resources that would be better used to find actual traffickers and the victims. So thank you for this opportunity to present these research findings, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to start with Dr. Benoit, if I could. First of all, delighted you could join us from Victoria, and I want to salute you for the enormous contribution your research has made over 20 years. You said 2/3 of the sex workers that you interviewed say they have little or no confidence in the police, and you gave 3 or 4 reasons for that. So I guess the logical question is, if the police need to do better, what do you recommend that they should do to improve their ability to detect potential victims where people are being trafficked?
Thank you. I think some of the suggestions have actually already been mentioned, but I in particular think police could have better liaison relationships with community organizations, of course, the organizations that are represented today, but also I would say sex worker organizations in the community who come in contact with a lot of people who are looking for other services. It could be health services, it could be food, it could be safe sex supplies. So those groups as well have contact with people who may be in danger for human trafficking. In Victoria, where I'm located, the police have done a wonderful job to try and reduce sexual assault increase sexual assault reporting for sex workers in the community, and they have done that by connecting closely with different health, social services, as well as the local sex work organization to actually assign police officers to work with these organizations and to receive training around how to be respectful, how to be non-judgmental, not to use stigmatizing language, and to increase the reporting for all kinds of victimization, sexual assault, but also if there's human trafficking. So I think there's a lot the police can do in some jurisdictions. It seems here in Ottawa, but also in Victoria, the police are making some strides in that way.
As a social scientist and doing your research, you started your remarks by giving us some idea of the kind of evidence that you've been able to gather. We've heard in different places from Statistics Canada and from people on the front line, community service providers, of the difficulty in acquiring useful statistics on human trafficking and related activities. Has that been your experience? And if so, do you have any recommendations on how we can improve the gathering of statistics?
Well, I think we have to realize that human trafficking is a very hidden activity. The sex industry in Canada is very hidden, and you have criminal code sanctions against an activity, it's very hidden. So even perhaps more hidden and in the shadows is human trafficking, and not only in Canada, across the globe. So we need to, we can depend on some people coming forward through victim services and so on, but we're not necessarily getting at the on the ground into the communities where traffickers may be moving. So I think we need to use a variety of strategies, including using social science research methods to get a diverse example of people in communities where you might like to find people, and then do some other investigative research there.
Dr. Benoit, you've done your research, you said, over 2 decades. We've had a Supreme Court decision in Bedford in 2013, and then we had a statute, Bill C-36, responding to that. Have you seen any impact of that case and that legislation on the human trafficking situation in Canada over your research career?
It's a little early to tell because the law's only been enacted since 2014. I have done follow-up interviews in Victoria in 2016-17. What I gather from the people I interviewed there, that these laws have not helped them feel safer, that especially for Indigenous people, they have actually have to be more hidden when they're involved in sex work because they don't want their clients to be discovered and so on. So whether it's impacted human trafficking, I don't know, because we don't really have those data in front of us. So I do think it's made it more difficult for people who legitimately want to be involved in sex work to be able to do so. And I don't think it's increased confidence in the police.
Thank you. I'd like to...
Dr. Benoit. I'd like to build on what Mr. Murray was talking about regarding data. So, and I'd like to understand your testimony a little better. I believe you said that human trafficking is not widespread among adults, and that in your study, I believe it was in 2014, 66% of the respondents indicated that they had been forced at some stage in their lives into a human trafficking situation. So in that testimony, you seem to be a bit of an outlier from the kind of testimony we were hearing from quite a number of people. I'm wondering if you have an explanation for that, whether your data, whether it's difficulty in collecting data, or whether the other data that we're hearing is more anecdotal, or what. And in that respect, I noticed that you mentioned that in one of your studies, you required that the people involved in the study had to be legally able to work in Canada. And I'm wondering if that might skew the results in terms of eliminating people who are not able to work in Canada, but who were nevertheless trafficked. So if you could respond, I'd appreciate it.
Hello?
Can we hear, see if we can hear you?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're back to Mr. McKinnon's first question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that I'm not a researcher of human trafficking. I'm studying the organization of sex industry in the country. I'm looking at the health and working conditions of people involved, and I'm interested in their access to non-judgmental services. So I've used a variety of survey methods to try and get access to the diversity of people who are involved in the activity, and in those an hour and a half length interviews, human trafficking has been mentioned. It comes up when I ask people about their early life events and how they got involved in the sale of sexual services, and that's where 6% describe themselves being forced or exploited in their earlier life. So that definitely differs from what some of the other work that or information you're hearing, which is when victims of human trafficking are connected with services. So that's very, very different. And in studies of the sex industry, where your example is only a clinical example, that is only people who go to seek services, then you get a much more homogeneous sample than the one that I described that we have found in our research. Secondly, why we chose in our study to be legally, person had to be legally able to work in Canada, because we were interested in the impact of the prostitution criminal code laws, adult prostitution code laws on people's ability to work in the country and their experiences of health, safety, and victimization. So that's we were especially interested in the Bedford and the consequences that would be happening in the criminal code. So that was the reason why, and also the reason why we chose people as adults.
One brief question, Sergeant, if it's okay. One of the things that I heard as we were traveling the country, and this is coming back to my colleague Ms. Khalid's question, was that people who are procuring sex, and I won't signify that it's one sex or another because it could be both, even though it's mostly men, buying it from mostly women, but could be men, could be the biggest ally in terms of identifying people who are being trafficked. If purchasing sex wasn't criminalized and people felt free to come forward and say that this is what I'm seeing. The same as what women in the sex trade that we met with were telling us, that they could be the biggest ally of police in those cities where they feel confident to talk to the police and point out underage women, people being trafficked. I'd like to get your commentary and that of Dr. Benoit on whether or not that approach is a feasible approach to say, let's work with the people who are in this trade, who are consenting, who are adults, to help identify people who are being compromised and being trafficked. So I'll ask the sergeant and then Dr. Benoit to just answer my question.
I can give you a sort of a case.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Benoit?
Yes, well, there have been studies of clients, including some of my own colleagues here in Canada, and also a fairly large study of clients or people who buy sexual services in Sweden after purchasing was criminalized. And those people reported in those interviews that they were less likely to come forward with information about someone who was being forced into prostitution or being held against their will. Of course, with legitimate reasons, because they were fearing that they would be arrested for purchasing. So, and in Canada, I think we have the same situation where people are now fearful to come forward. And it's the same with people who operate in escort agencies or massage parlor. If they see something, it's very difficult for them to come forward at this point in time, given our law. But there could be practices even now where we say an amnesty for coming forward with information about legal or especially human trafficking activity or minor being involved in sexual exchange. And I think actually clients and other third parties would be much more willing to come forward with information if we knew the justice systems would not criminalize them. And that would also, of course, be for sex workers themselves.
Thank you. Not seeing any more questions. I want to thank the panel for being here today. Thank you, Dr. Benoit, for joining us from Victoria, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.